This is Tips, Tools, and Tricks for Terrific Teams with Lori Gotlieb. We're so pleased to have you back, Lori. I have a personal sense I'm going to learn an important lesson from today's presentation because Lori has shared her presentation, which reflects emphasis on a number of leadership elements, one of which really caught my eye, and that is succession planning. It almost seems counterintuitive, right? You're saying, "Hi, I'm the leader. Thanks for all your trust. I'm ready to do my job, but the first thing on my agenda is to figure out who's going to replace me." Amongst all the important ideas and experiences Lori seems prepared to share with us, that is one I'm eager to take in. Um, I would like to acknowledge the land on which I reside and from where I'm working today. It's traditional territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people, more specifically the Algonquins of Pikwakanagan First Nation, whose lands were the subject of Treaty 27 from 1819. I shared the URL of a map of Ontario with some great information about this idea, this aspect, this part of truth and reconciliation we continue to work towards, if you'd like to consult that. Lori, we are very grateful you agreed to join us and help us today again. Please join me, everyone, in offering a very warm welcome to Lori Gotlieb to our PAVRO webinar series. Thank you, Lori.
Thank you very much. So it's a pleasure to be here again. For those of you who are on the call, I have a fondness for PAVRO. I have been a member for many, many, many years, sitting on different committees and so forth. So like, you are my peeps. As I do this, I say this at every workshop that I teach. We have an hour, it's not a lot of time. If you have any questions afterwards, if you have any concerns, if you want to ask me something that's more detailed, feel free to email me. If you feel free to call me. As well, on this front page, I do have a podcast with 7 topics, kind of microeducation, and as well, you can get all kinds of articles on my WordPress site. So let's get started. That doesn't want to start. All right, guys. So just a little funny. So this workshop is really, it's like Dean said, it's a multitude of things, because terrific teams brings in all different aspects, from leadership to management to communications to succession planning, because that's a main part of what we're always struggling with. And at the foundation of what I want to talk about is being proactive, not reactive. So keep that in mind as you're building your teams and you're looking at how do you engage with volunteers. And in this particular workshop, it doesn't matter whether it's boards, committees, leadership volunteers, direct service volunteers, indirect service volunteers. It's about people. Okay. And your role is leadership. So as administrators of volunteers, whatever your title is, you are more than just managers or administrators. You represent volunteerism in your organization, and you represent volunteer engagement in your organization. And so you should have, and if you don't have, these are, doing these workshops are a great way to start, but you really need to think about the fact that you need to have the ability to be influential. You have influence, and it is important that you present yourself as having the ability to know what's going on, because you're the liaison between the general public, people want to volunteer, your staff, your board, your committee, and all of these are teams. They're all groups of people that need to work together. These days, we also have to be creative in the way that we engage our volunteers. We have to be creative in the way we engage our staff with our volunteers. Communication is a big part of how we work with volunteers, but it is also one of the biggest challenges we have right now, because everybody's communicating in different ways. So you don't have that luxury of, hey, let's get into a room together and do some strategic planning. So, you do the Zoom thing, but the Zoom loses that ability to read people, that intuition, that the way that you connect with your volunteers, the way that you connect with your staff. So it's really important that you take that perspective, recognizing that you're people-centered. That's what we do. We're relationship builders, but we have to be forward-thinking, and we're not. In general, we are reactive. So if nothing else, I always say, here's tip number 1, think ahead. Think about what it is that you do, because you are that person in the middle. Your job is to inspire people, inspire your teams, empower your teams, lead change. So be a change management leader, and share what's working in your organization. How are your volunteers working together? Share that with other staff. Share that with volunteers. Talk about it. Celebrate it, because that's what sets up this environment of positive teams, right? So you kind of sit in the middle here. You're instilling vision, but you also handle operations. So to me, the sweet spot is working on both sides of that coin. And volunteers, volunteer coordinators, leaders, administrators that I've seen that have been very successful are those that actually recognize that they're not just a manager dealing with issues and problems, but they're actually a leader that is minimizing and mitigating the issues and problems by building strong teams. And we'll get into that today, okay? Why is it hard to manage volunteers? Well, obviously, the lack of tangible rewards, you don't know what people want, lack of support. I don't actually believe, and this is where I get into trouble, that we support our volunteers enough and in the right way. I think we're just so overworked and overwhelmed with everything that we do that we fall short in retention. And that's that part where the tips, tools for terrific teams, that's where your terrific teams kick in, is that retention side of things. And it starts with poor onboarding. We do what we have to do. We do the orientation session, we do the training, we send them off, and then what? We let them go do what they need to do. We do quick check-ins, but we're not really thinking about our volunteers in a team approach. Are there opportunities for strong, volunteers that you really admire what they're doing, to become mentors, to become educators, to become trainers themselves? Can you replicate good behavior with your volunteers, with other volunteers? The other thing is, think about from a team perspective, is we forgive errors. So you're in a meeting and somebody says something that's inappropriate, or they're hijacking the meeting. Do you talk to them afterwards, or you just kind of let it go? Right? So if we give these errors, which then what you see, your volunteers are seeing, right? And everybody's motivation is different. So we have to, as leaders of volunteers, when it comes to team building, figure out what it is that our volunteers want to do. How do they want to be supported? How do they want to be communicated? What do they see their path in life cycle in the organization is? And ask them. We don't have to guess these things. We can actually have these conversations, send out a survey, find out what our volunteers want. How do they need to be supported and educated to build great teams? How do they want to connect with each other? Right? So it's important for us to be looking at setting goals. To build effective teams, you need to set goals. What do we want to do this year? And as Dean said, succession planning should be that lifeblood running through our volunteer population. We always need to be thinking about, oh, wait a minute, that person's, sorry, I'm going to keep an eye on that person. I want to have that conversation with that person, because you never want to be to the point where you have gaps. So again, where you're reactive versus proactive. So succession, and I'll talk about that, is a proactive activity, right? And you want to model good behavior. You want to encourage people to engage in ways that make sense to them, right? But it starts with who you bring in. So, we want diversity. And when I say diversity, I just don't mean diversity as in what we consider to be diversity in culture and all that stuff, but I'm talking about diversity of experience. I'm talking about diversity in personalities. So you have different kinds of personalities in your teams, right? So picture having a whole bunch of people who are achievers, that just tell me what you want me to do and I'll get it done. Like, you're missing some of that soft skills, some of that engagement that volunteers can do with each other. You want that passion, but you also want volunteers that are willing to learn, right? Because as we bring in our volunteers and move them through our life cycle, It would be ideal, best practices is to be able to move them from roles that are important to both them, but also to you, but also have that knowledge transfer. So you want to ensure that you have a balance. So it's just something to consider. You also want to ensure that you are developing role descriptions that make sense, that any gaps that you have, that you remove those gaps. So it may be skills gap, it may be personality gaps, it may be that you have a whole bunch of people that want to follow, but nobody wants to lead. So how many times have you had worked with volunteers where, okay, we need to get this done, and nobody is raising their hand, right? So you're busy like trying to get people to do that. So that's even a gap, like different kinds of personalities, different kinds of motivations of volunteers will help you build out some of your teams. And the ability to cultivate potential volunteers from your network, right? So these are some of the keys to success. Also, utilizing skills and talents of members that you may not even know about, right? So we don't know what our volunteers, we have a volunteer, they come in to do ABC, but do we have those conversations with them as to what other skills that they have? And I know we have them at the interview process, but I'm talking about afterwards as they kind of get to know the organization, where they can actually say, I have some great ideas, or I have these skills. Maybe I can help you in training, or maybe I can help you in strategic planning. So giving volunteers an opportunity as part of the team to kind of take a step back now that they know what's going on, and going, I have some ideas with this. So with employees, we do that, right? Everybody wants to kind of move up the ladder, but we don't really do that with volunteers, right? We kind of leave them where they are because we need them where they are. So think about it from an employee standpoint. When you're sitting and you're in your staffing teams, you want to encourage people's ideas. You want to encourage opinions. You want to encourage new ideas. I say embrace it in the volunteer world as well. Have some of those opportunities to work with you, to have those discussions with your volunteers. So, and at the end of the day, what you end up with is engaged volunteers, people who share the path with you, people who are willing to take on roles they didn't think they wanted to take on. So again, as you give them permission to feel like they're part of a team, they will be more open to take on roles that they normally wouldn't have. So I want to remove things like, so you know how you have in committees where people go, I don't want to be chair, but I'll be co-chair. That's really about that safety, feeling like they want to do it, but they're not 100% sure that they can do it. So if they do it with another person, they feel that they're supported. And I think it's a great way to start and build leadership. I have no issues with doing co-chair situations. It also solves a lot of problems these days with gaps. But it's also a sign from the other way that, are people feeling like they can take those leap of faith in leadership roles. So the focus on everything is really about communication, right? So terrific teams is about how we communicate. Here's where we have some problems these days, because as we know, and research tells us that we listen to very little. We actually only pick up about 7% of what's being said, because we're looking at how they're saying it. We're looking at tone. So when you look at relationships, historically, it's been not just the words, but the way they sit, how their arms are they open to suggestion? Have they put the wall up? Are they reacting to another team member? Now that we're in this virtual world, it is a little bit more difficult to actually figure out how your teams work together, because we're not really seeing who our audience is, right? Because not only are we dealing with generational gaps, we have 4 generations in the volunteer and workforce, but you also have different forms of communication. So people who normally like to talk on the phone, maybe in one generation, and there are people who never want to pick up the phone. They'd rather you text them. Well, okay, so you make a phone call for a volunteer, you want something, they don't answer the phone, you now have a take on, well, this person's not being very responsive, but if you turn around and you text them, you get an immediate response. So picture that also with volunteers to volunteers. So the communication process is a little bit more of a challenge right now, and we have to figure out ways to engage our teams together. So whether it's a staff team or whether it's a volunteer team, having ways to break some of those barriers, and like I said, the physiological, by maybe doing things like icebreakers before meetings, just adding in that social aspect before a meeting, or sending out a survey after a meeting. How did we did? What was missing? What would you like to see at the next meeting? Right? So you can incorporate people's feedback into the work that you do, right? You need to understand, to have good teams, you need to understand who your team is, so the audience, right? There's a difference between when you're a group of staff working together and a group of volunteers working together. You also need to understand what's the purpose of how you're communicating with your volunteers. What is this? What are your expectations from your team? So you send something out, like how many times have we sent something out and gotten no response? We asked questions, we asked for help, but we didn't get any response, right? So making sure that they understand that there's an expectation and that their feedback is very important starts to build that relationship as a team together. So it could be a chat group, it could be a group virtual session that where you just kind of, we just want 15 minutes of your time to pose a question and see if we can get some responses, right? We need to understand the various, when I say channels, what we use for what. So team building now, like I said, everybody's working from different locations. How do we build a team using Zoom or whatever we use? Our phones, our phone calls. What do our meetings look like? You know, are they just straight meeting? So how do we use, you know, do we have an Instagram group? Do we have a Facebook group just for our volunteers or our staff? What are we using and how are we using it, and who's the audience? Okay. On top of that, just to make things even more challenging with teams, we have barriers. And these barriers we need to address, right? So I've set a lot of them up here. You know, you need to figure out what your barriers are. In some cases, it's just culture of the organization. Some cases, it's the perception of how we work together, or the perception of, you know, the committee is working great, and then it starts to, you got one person who's not happy, they start complaining. Their perception of what's being done is now going from positive to negative. They now take a whole bunch of people with them because people complain in groups, and you're not addressing it at the right time in the right way. And next thing you know, one or two things happen. Either they take over the committee, or they all quit in mass, right? So now you've got a group of people, you know, there's always leaders, right? And you got a group of people that will follow the leader. We have language barriers that we need to address. People's take on what it is that you're trying to get across. So is what you're saying what they're hearing? Emotions, motivations. People come in to volunteer for many different reasons. And people come in with their own emotion into what they see a team is and where they see their part in the team. Right. So there's all kinds of barriers that we need to manage as we build teams. And like I said, overcoming these barriers is in effective communication, right? So it's looking at what it is that we want to say to our staff / volunteer / teams, and what it is that we want from them. So I'm always like recognizing it's a 360. We want to be communicating and getting feedback on a regular basis. I really believe that builds strong teams, right? So we have to look at language, different ways, different words, slangs, all those types of things. Understanding everybody comes in with unique experiences and recognizing that. And that is becoming more prevalent in our landscape. Right? So we have people coming in from all different places, all different cultures, all different backgrounds, all different experiences. And the way that you see a team and the way that you do things may be very different than they see a team. So for example, you may have a volunteer who barely talks in a meeting, and it may very well be culturally, they're very respectful to who they see the leader is. Because you, in many cases, are seen as the boss, right? So depending on why they came into volunteer and how they came into volunteer, I've recognized over years that sometimes you're seen as a person of authority. So you need to ensure that they feel comfortable, and we've removed those barriers. But understanding as you communicate with your team that they're coming in with all different experiences. And the other thing is that emotions are always in play. And I always believe that if you see something and you don't think it's appropriate, address it, right? It's always just better to put it out there and find out what's going on than it is to guess or ignore it, because whatever you, like I said to you before, whatever you saw, somebody else saw, okay? And focus on what's important. Shut out these distractions and these interruptions. So example, think about a team meeting and you have an agenda and it goes off the rails. Your job as the chair, as the leader, is to ensure that things get back on the rails, right? So I always say, when it comes to teams, the chair, the leader, they're the conductor, right? It's your job to ensure that the expectations of the team are very clear. Starts with role description, starts with, like, if you're doing group work, it starts with making clear expectations of what a meeting is, or what the role of that afternoon is, ensuring that it doesn't go off the rails, right? Use a parking lot, respect people's times, right? Respect people's opinions, and give everybody an opportunity to talk. Oops. So again, I'm not going to talk too much about, like, I give you a lot of content and I don't always use, go through all the content. Like, I don't follow my PowerPoints exactly, but I want to highlight a few things. So we need to ensure that we're clarifying what our expectations are. But key things from positive teams is active listening. That is one of the most important tools that we have in our toolkit, is that we're listening to our volunteers, our staff, that we're being open-minded, that maybe the way you want to do something may not be the best way. It may be the way it worked before, but it's not working now. So get some feedback, ask some opinions, get a consensus of how people can work together or what it is that they're doing. But avoid distractions, things that are, and people who are negative. So, in this case, volunteers that are the ones that you're worried about are the ones that are actually causing the most distractions. Okay, so we always have to recognize that they're going to want to take over something. They're going to want to be heard. And so there's a right place and a right time. And that's where, like I said, where teams start to fall apart, is when everybody's coming in from a different perspective, right? So you need to be confident and feel comfortable to lead those teams, to take things back where they have to take it back. And in any case, this is why we're here. Like, go back to the basics. We are here to do these objectives. If you're not prepared to help us do these objectives, and this is the behavior that I've been seeing, this is how we minimize the behavior. Maybe it's training, maybe it's one-to-one conversations, but ignoring things is not going to help the problem. So you need to address things directly. And it's not about the person, it's always about the behavior. But verbal communication skills are key to great teams. Think back to teams or supervisors that you really admire. And what was it about them that made you admire them? And I guarantee you it's going to be things like they listened to you, that they exuded a leadership, but they were also creative, that they engaged different methods of communicating and engaging their teams. All right, so think about that. And also think about the different generations, because that is, the elephant in the room. right? When it comes to teams, every perspective is very different, but then you add in the generations. So I come from a world of face-to-face contact. I'd rather have a phone call than do a text. So I'll text back and forth about 3 times. I call it the volleyball effect. And then I'm out. Okay, I'm going to call you. My friends all know that. My colleagues all know that. We can go back about 3 or 4 texts and then I'm done. My thumbs hurt. I'm done. But certain generations, they don't want the phone call. Just they want to have it in text, have it on paper, send in an email. So you have to consider that with your teams as to who they are, what they want, and how they're going to engage. If you cannot, you know, when you have issues, this is what's going to happen. You get low morale, so the work's not getting done. People are not motivated. The biggest one is the gossip and complaining. That is just nature, human nature. We do it ourselves. You know, the old water cooler, did you hear about? So we want to ensure that we want to minimize that. We get volunteers that are not focused and misinterpretation of messages. And basically you get stuck, right? And you can't get done what you need to get done. What ends up happening is loss of time, poor performance, you're frustrated, and then you get these fractions, like of small groups of people that kind of want to take over. Right. So this is some of the tips and tools that I think they're going to help. Sorry, I need to move something because all your faces are on my work. Build and use role descriptions to their maximum, right? At the end of the day, it is about the role. So if you're having issues, sometimes you may have to take a step back and address the role. Maybe the role's not working anymore. Maybe it needs to be changed. Ensure that your volunteers know what is expected of them. So it's not just the job itself, but the way we work together. And I know in many cases that's not addressed. So, you know, I've worked in organizations where my volunteers come from one perspective and my staff come from a different perspective. And so I'm one of those people that's always been very transparent. And so I'll say to my volunteers, and I may have told you guys this before, I'll say, when you come into the office and the staff don't say hi to you, it's not you, it's them, right? So don't take it personally. They're busy, they're overworked, they're this, you know, like it's not, I'm apologizing for them ahead of time, but ensure that also the volunteers know what is expected of them in terms of behavior, right? And address things early. Keep the workload manageable, because that's also how teams start to fall apart, where there's an imbalance of who's doing the work. So you want to make sure that everybody's doing what is right for them, right? Communicate often, celebrate successes, send out thank yous, talk about impact. We all do much better with positive reinforcement. It's just the little things, but those little things make a huge difference, right? So you want to create trust, create respect, create an opportunity for feedback, but also create opportunities for growth. So one of the struggles with teams is that people have outgrown the role, or people have more potential than what we see them. So we want to also ensure that we're providing opportunities for volunteers to grow. Remember back that succession thing? Respond to things in a timely manner. So if there's an issue that's happening, address it within 24 to 48 hours. At minimum, address the fact that there's an issue. You may not have a solution immediately, but address it, because it'll make the people involved feel like they're being heard, feel like it's an actionable item. So don't ignore something or leave it till after the fact, right? So make sure you deal with issues in a timely manner. Obviously be kind and respectful all interactions, and acknowledge people's opinions on things. Like I said before, acknowledge wins, but learn from each other. We're not all experts on team building, and we're not all experts on communication. And there's some people that are better at that than we are. So let's embrace that. Let's learn from others. If somebody has a better way of doing something, then let's learn from them. Sorry, my slides. But like I said to you before, I'm just giving you the slide. I'm going to go past it pretty quickly. It comes down to the role description, right? So they, you know, when it really comes down to is when you have issues with your volunteers, many cases is, well, I didn't realize that's what I was supposed to do or not supposed to do. That role description is so important in our field because it's not only how we market, because we talked about the last workshop, how we orient and train, but also how we performance manage, right? That is that piece of paper that they agreed to. And when you're having an issue with a volunteer, that's that piece of paper that you go back to. I want to talk about personalities because I think this is also really important when it comes to teams, right? So picture, I do the David McClellan motivational styles because I find it's the simplest one that works. And I'm sure most of you know it, but if you don't, here's a very quick lesson. They focus on 3 different kinds of personalities. And we all have all 3 of them, but we're stronger in one way than they are the other way. So you have the affiliators, you have the achievers, and you have the influencers. So when things start to go wrong at the basics, when it comes to teams, think about these kinds of groupings. So affiliators are people who place high emphasis on relationship building. So when they come in to do volunteer work, whether it's a meeting, whether it's coming to the office, whatever it is, it's all about the social aspect. It's not about the work, it's about the social aspect. They volunteer to make friends, right? They need to have interaction. If you put them in a room by themselves, they will constantly be coming out. And I don't know if I told you guys the story. I had a guy once that I brought in to do mailings, and he was totally an affiliator. And he walked out every 5 minutes. He had an excuse for everything. And he didn't get anything work done. I put a second person in that room and it was boom, never saw him again. Picture these people in committees and in meetings, right? If they don't have the cake and the cookie and the sandwich ahead of time or that social time, they're grumpy. And that falls into the meetings, right? They need that social aspect to be part of something. Now, put a whole bunch of affiliators in a group together to do a job. What happens? Absolutely nothing, right? They'll talk, they'll chit chat, they'll go all over the place, but you're not actually reaching the goals you need to reach. So think about team building. Get a whole bunch of affiliators as part of your team because they're all nice people and they all want to volunteer, but nobody's willing to take on something. They're all talking, did you hear about, or really should we be doing that? I'm thinking that maybe we shouldn't because of this, this, and this. And then everything goes off the rails. Okay. Next group, achievers. This group is your task-oriented. Tell them what you want to do. They'll do it. They'll do check-ins. They like to problem solve. They seek responsibility. A lot of achievers I find we're as volunteer coordinators, we're kind of like a little bit of all 3, but we kind of sit pretty good in this one, right? We're conscientious, those types of things. Now, put an achiever in a team with a whole bunch of affiliators. And how do you think that achiever is going to feel? Just tell me what you want me to do and tell me when the due date is. I don't care that you guys all want out for dinner. I don't care about the personality of this. I don't care about the whole social aspect. Tell me what you want to do. That's what's going on in their head. They're not saying anything, but that's what's going on in their head. These guys will stick to the job for a little bit, but if they find that there's so much going on that I call it noise, they'll leave. This is 80% of your volunteers force. This is the group you do not want to leave because they're the ones that do all the work, right? So you got like 10, 80, 10. So affiliators, 10, 80. You always have to eye on the affiliators. And then you have the influencers. These are my favorite people. These are your committee volunteers for the most part. Well-spoken, seek responsibility, wants the tell me how is this going to make a difference? Tell me, what is your end goal? They love having authority. They'll open up doors that I got a guy, no problem. I will make contact with that guy. I can hook you up, but they want to do no work. Okay. So you got a bunch of influencers on a committee saying, yeah, I got a contact, but they actually don't follow through. So picture these three groups working together, right? If you've got a whole bunch of influencers doing work, so they're strong personalities, what are you going to get? A lot of power struggles, right? And very difficult to manage this group, because this is the group that gives you access where you want to go. This is the kind of group that sits more in that fundraising role, like those fundraising committees, because we want people that can open up doors and stuff like that, but they don't do the work. So remember, think about what the role is, what the job is, and then getting the right person into the role. So when you look at your teams, look at it from the perspective of, it's a simplest way of doing it, but it works. How many affiliators, like what kind of personalities do we have together, and have that balance, right? Because you have too many influencers, you're going to have infighting. Too many affiliators, nothing's going to get done. Too many achievers, nobody wants to take the reins. And then you end up with poor communication because things don't happen. And usually the really good volunteers, they eventually walk away because it's just too much of a struggle for them. So that's kind of, one of the big tips that I'm thinking of in terms of what your teams are, is just balancing off these things. And again, it goes to the role. If you have a role that you want a lot of affiliators in, then that's great. If that role is good for affiliators, fantastic. But putting the right person in the right role is just as important from a personality standpoint, to balance off, to make sure that you have good, strong communication with your volunteers. The other thing is, you want to ensure that you've got great positive roles, right? You want people who can provide information and not only ask questions, but give opinions and help, right? We're teams. You want people who are on your team that ask for clarification. You want people who are able to summarize things and evaluate things in a positive way. What you don't want is these negative people, right? And you need to deal with these people, right? You don't want, my favorite, we did that before, it didn't work. Okay. But we're not talking about what was, we're talking about where we want to go. So we can spend a little time and address why this didn't work, but times have changed. This is what our goal is. What do you think we can do to make it work? Flip it, because you're going to get a lot of, we did that before and it didn't work. I've been around for a long time. I've seen this so many times before. Great. How do you see us moving forward? This is what the goal is, right? So you're going to get this kind of personality. And the only way, you got two options with this kind of personality: either get them to start thinking in the positive, or bless and release at some point. And I'm a firm believer in bless and release. Keeping volunteers on just for the sake of keeping them on is not doing anybody any help. But I do believe in that 1, 2, 3, you're out. So, let's address it. Let's talk about it. Let's document it. Sometimes they don't even realize. So I had a volunteer once who was brought in as a leader of a committee. He had no skills, but he had the power. He had influence. He had charisma. He was actually an NHL hockey player. So the powers that be wanted him, right? So he was chairing a committee for an event. It was a complete disaster, He, in very, very quick fashion, alienated his whole committee by the fact that all of these things, he was dominating, he was seeking attention, he was critical, he was aggressive. And so we talked to him, but again, being who he was, my powers were kind of limited, but I documented everything, ran the event. Everything got done because we were doing things underneath him, behind the scenes. The next year comes up and they want him again. And at that point I went, no, And this is why not. And so I said, listen, let me have the conversation with him. And see, and it turned out he didn't really want to be the committee chair. He didn't care. He wanted to have an impact. He wanted to share his story. So I talked to him and I said, well, where do you see yourself fitting in? Where do you see that you can make an impact? And he said, well, I just want to talk to people. I said, well, what about a speaker? And he went, never thought about that. And so we slowly moved him out of that role. He was absolutely successful as an ambassador and a speaker. So like I said, sometimes it's not about the person, it's about the role that they're put in. And everything after that was beautiful and smooth sailing. So negative roles are a real issue. I want to talk about committees and chairs because that's where the majority of where a lot of team work is done. I want to be really clear about something. The role of the chair or the lead is so important because it's like I said, the conductor, they set the tone. And their job is to make sure that action items are carried out, that people's time is respected, that things are not being distracting, that people are heard. So if it's not part of this activity or agenda, that it gets parking lotted and addressed another time. But it's also their job to ensure that everybody has a voice. And so it's important for them to kind of watch what's going on in the room, because there are a lot of people that when there's strong personalities on a team, they start to back off. And it's not that they don't have anything to say. It's just they don't want to feel that they're being aggressive from their perspective, or don't feel that their say has value, right? And so it's really important for the chair to ensure that all of these, not only the agenda and the action items, because positive teams means making sure that you say what you're going to do and you actually get it done, but also that everybody has an opportunity to talk. I'm not going to talk much about committees. I think my key point with committees and team building is seek full participation. It's not okay for people to not participate, because those that are participating will feel that, like, why am I doing all the work? Why am I saying all the things? Eventually resentment kicks in. And I've seen this with friends, and what they end up doing is they quiet quit. And then you don't hear from them again. So again, it's the chair or the lead's responsibility to ensure that there's a balance in the work that gets done, whether it's at an event, whether it's a blood drive, whatever it is, but everybody's participating equally or to their ability, because everyone's watching, right? And when it comes to team dynamics, it's about everybody feeling like their time is respected and that they're getting out what they want to get out of the activity. Okay, so I've given you some slides on this. I'm not going to address it because I want to give some time for questions, but use the parking lot. Just don't discuss things for the sake of discussing, because we need to respect people's time. Send out agendas ahead of time with key expectations. So like I said, my other world at Elections Canada, I get an agenda, says exactly how many minutes we're talking about what we're talking about. And I respect that, and they respect our time. And if it doesn't go further, if we don't get it all done, it gets addressed either in the next meeting or something else. But it's how teams can manage well together, because in a lot of cases, team members are like, this is the time I allotted to do this. This is the time I came in to volunteer. Respect that. I'm yours for this period of time, but let's do, let's work well together. Okay. Part of what you need to be doing is looking at, so after this workshop is, okay, what's not working? So how are we going to address what's not working? Are we prepared to ensure that our team gets what they want? It's actually not a bad idea after an activity, like I said, to ask for feedback. Or before, you have a meeting before the first 10 minutes of the next meeting is like, what do you feel you got out of the previous meeting? How can we better support you? Right? When a volunteer leaves, do that exit interview, do that feedback opportunity is such missed knowledge that can help us build better volunteer programs by not asking volunteers why they left. And I guarantee you're going to get some really interesting answers. Like I said, I have a friend who just left a committee for a health charity, and she told me why she left. And my time was not being respected. When I sat in meetings, I didn't feel like I was being heard. I didn't know what impact I was making, and I've just had enough. So I said to her, okay, that's respectful. You made your decision. And she also said, this has been going on for a year. So I said, are you going to talk to them? And she said, why bother at this point? And I explained to her, but how are they going to know that they're not running good teams? And so I talked to her. She actually said, and you know what? I'll send an email out. So it's really important. Like, we do make mistakes. We're dealing with all different kind of people dynamics, that we learn from that, right? And there's no like one set standard on how to do it. It's about communication. Okay, so like I said to you before, job descriptions are really important. Communicating the vision, your goals, your objectives are really important, right? And ensure that you give feedback, both formally and informally, is really helping to engage in good teams. Okay. I've kind of talked about this already. Difficult volunteers. I'm going to give you a couple heads up, and a lot of you have been around. Be honest, be timely, keep the emotion out of it, and use the job description. So it's about, this is the behavior I saw. This is what the role is. How do we come up with a way to make things right? Do you need education? Do you need a shadow? Do you need support? Is this the right role for you? Right? Or if it's something, like I said, if it's not working, if they're doing something, then you say, listen, this is what I saw. This goes against, I'm not talking about stuff that goes against policies, right? Like that, those are easier ones, but it's these gray zones. We're going to try it again, but if it doesn't work, this is what the outcome's going to be, right? We're not here to help you. We're here to help our stakeholders, our clients. It's a relationship. So we tend to be very tiptoe around our volunteers, but I hear a lot of them like, volunteers aren't doing anything. They're not helping out. They're not showing up, right? If your volunteers aren't showing up, why aren't you addressing that? Right? If your employees didn't show up, would you not address that? So these kinds of, sometimes some of the stuff is just like low hanging fruit. You guys know about poor performance and why, but here's some list of like why people don't perform well, are not good team members, and see that, make sure that you're not doing any of these things, right? Mixed messaging, like I said, lack of consequences. Like, part of being a positive team is making sure that things are addressed that need to be addressed on a timely fashion, right? And have a succession plan, right? Succession plans are really important, and they're not something you do alone. You engage other people in it. Let other staff know that you're looking for, these are the skills you're looking for. We want leadership volunteers through ABC. Share information. Don't do it in a vacuum, right? Use technology, provide training, reach out to your networks. This is something that is ongoing in what you do. And there's some great tools that you could be doing in terms of succession planning, is creating a mentorship or a coaching program, right? A mentorship and coaching program allows for this knowledge transfer. So you have a volunteer that's been doing a role for a certain period of time. They want to go off the role. You consider them being a mentor. So they actually are a bridge for the new volunteer, makes the new volunteer feel like they're being supported, takes some of the pressure off of you, and it allows for a significant amount of knowledge transfer, and, you know, and a significant amount of support for a brand new volunteer. So in that role, so look at education, look at mentorship, look at coaching as part of succession planning. All right, so I gave you a couple slides on that. And at the end of the day, what you would end up is, you know, with engaged volunteers, ideally willing to take on roles that are not what they came in for, or willing to grow. To me, that's really positive team building. Volunteers engaging other volunteers. That's when you've got success. When your volunteers are wanting to bring in volunteers as well, they're having such great experiences, right? The ability to listen and optimize the tools and the resources that you have. To me, that's a lot of what success looks like. I don't know what I think is. Oh, that was my last slide. You know, at the end of the day, it's, I'll just put that back there. Play from current slide. Sorry, guys. At the end of the day, team building is really its communication, right? And looking at addressing and looking at what are the issues that we have and how do we minimize those, mitigate risk. And if that's education or training, or, you know, I say with boards and committees, especially every year, the board and committee should have a training session, not on governance, how to play nice in the sandbox. And this way, they are being given the tools at the beginning of that year of how we work together. So I do a lot of these board and committee trainings, and it's how do you play nice, right? How do you communicate? How do you minimize issues? How do you address issues? And this way, they all have given the same information at the beginning of the year. As things start to go off the rails, you go back to, hey, remember when we all agreed to this, you learned this. So that's what I'm saying. Education is key. You can't assume that your volunteers have the skills that you have to work together. So volunteer training on communication skills, you know, doing a workshop like this for your volunteers, right? So this way they have the tools themselves. FAQs, resources, there's lots of ways that you can engage your volunteer staff, whatever they are, to work well together. But we can't make assumptions that they're going to, right? But as leaders, it's our job to see where the gaps are and try the best way to fill them and ask them. It's a 360 relationship. Any questions? Concerns? Everybody go to sleep?
Thank you so much, Lori. That's a brilliant presentation. I've benefited immensely from it because I've been looking at this leadership aspect, and it's so complicated, so complex. There's so much to consider, and a significant number of your slides provided the very framework and dimensions to that complexity that I'm referring to. One of the books that I've recently referred to is probably an obscure one that not everyone has heard of, but Irving Goffman and his book, The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life, where he compares the social interactions that we have to conduct as leaders. He compares those, or raises the metaphor of theatrical performance. In other words, as an actor, you need to be able to change your approach to every different personality or situation, you name it. It's very, very interesting, and might even lead to awards presentations within volunteer communities called the Academy Awards of Volunteer Resource Leadership. I just wanted to offer a minute for questions. If anybody has questions, they can send them to me. But more importantly, to say thank you for another brilliant presentation and give the final word to our wonderful president, Heather, who may have some Christmas wishes she'd like to express for everybody.
Thank you very much, Dean. Lori, thank you so much. What a great presentation. Thank you to everyone for being here today. Yes, just want to express happy holidays to everyone on the call and to all the work that you've all done this entire year in your various organizations. Certainly hope to see you at future PAVRO workshops, as I know Dean is working very hard on that. Also can sort of drop a wee bit of a teaser that we are planning for our 2024 in-person conference in May. So watch your information for that. But fantastic presentation, Lori. Thank you again so much. Thanks to everyone for being here.
Always a pleasure. Happy holidays, everybody.
Yeah. And we look forward to seeing everyone in the new year, and I wish everyone happy holidays.
Bye-bye.